Lieutenant General Sir Aylmer Gould Hunter-Weston KCBDSO GStJ was a British Army general who served in World War I at Gallipoli and in the very early stages of the Somme Offensive. He was also a Member of Parliament, nicknamed Hunter-Bunter. Hunter-Weston has been seen as a classic example of a donkey general. He was described by his superior Sir Douglas Haig as a rank amateur, and has been referred to by one modern writer as one of the Great War's spectacular incompetents. However, another historian writes that although his poor performance at the battles of Krithia earned his reputation as one of the most brutal and incompetent commanders of the First World War, in his later battles he seemed to hit upon a formula for success. These small achievements were largely forgotten. Early career. Hunter-Weston was educated at Wellington College and was commissioned into the Royal Engineers in 1884. He was promoted captain in 1892. He served on the Indian Northwest frontier and took part in the Miranzi expedition of 1891 and was wounded during the Waziristan expedition of 1894–95. During this time he was promoted to brevet major. He was on General Herbert Kitchener's staff on the Nile expedition of 1896. He attended Staff College 1898–9. He later took part in the Second Boer War in South Africa between 1899 and 1902 as a staff officer, then as commander of the Mounted Engineers, then of the Royal Engineer Cavalry Division. He then became Deputy Assistant Adjutant General, then Chief of Staff to Sir John French's Cavalry Division, then commanded a cavalry column. He was described as having reckless courage combined with technical skill and great coolness in emergency, was mentioned in dispatches and received the Queen's South Africa Medal. He was General Sir John French's Chief Staff Officer in the Eastern Command from 1904 to 1908, after which he performed the same role in the Scottish Command until 1911. He married Grace Strang Steele in 1905. In 1911, he became the Assistant Director of Military Training. In the same year, he succeeded his mother as the 27th Laird of Hunterston and was made a member of the Order of the Bath. At the outbreak of the war in 1914, he was a Brigadier General in command of the 11th Infantry Brigade based at Colchester, and he commanded this unit as part of 4th Division on the Western Front, including at the battles of Locato and the Aisne, where he supervised his command from a motorbike. He often appeared in the most surprising places, and his handling of the brigade was skillful. His bravery and determination marked him out for promotion. Hunter-Weston was one of the senior officers commanded to write regularly to the King to keep His Majesty informed of military developments. Gallipoli campaign planning. When the Battle of Gallipoli commenced in March 1915, Hunter-Weston was promoted to the command of the British 29th Division, which was to make the landing at Cape Helles near the entrance to the Dardanelles. When asked for his advice before the landings, Hunter-Weston cautioned General Hamilton that the Turks had had ample time to turn the peninsula into an entrenched camp, that Helles was less vulnerable to Turkish attack than Suvla Bay, but conversely offered little room for maneuver, and given Britain's lack of high explosive shells needed to cover attacks risked an Allied bridgehead being tied up in front of Gallipoli Plateau and becoming a second Crimea, which would damage Britain's standing with neutral Greece and Romania. He suggested that given the loss of surprise it might be better to call off the expedition. Hunter-Weston wrote to his wife, "The odds against us are heavy. However, nothing is impossible." Birdwood also privately wrote the same, and Travers suggests that, as British officers of the era were expected to remain cheerful and optimistic in public, this may have been a safety outlet to be pointed to if the operation went wrong. Hunter-Weston, supported by Admiral Robeck, preferred a daylight landing at Els. Landings. Hunter-Weston concentrated on V, W and X beaches at the tip on the peninsula, less on S and Y beaches, which were intended merely to threaten the Turkish retreat. No contingency plan had been made for S or Y beach forces to push ahead if the main forces at V, W and X were held up. Admiral Weems and Hunter-Weston spent the 25th of April on board HMS Uranus, the attendant ship at W Beach, so were unable to inspect elsewhere. Hunter-Weston and his Chief of Staff Brigadier General H.E. Street were on the bridge, where the papers were scattered every 5 minutes when the ship's 9.2-INCH gun was fired. An angry Roger Keyes recorded that they were in complete ignorance of what was going on anywhere except at W and possibly at X Beach, and was furious at Hamilton for adhering to Staff College doctrine by not interfering with the man on the spot. He diverted the Essex Regiment from V to W Beach at 0830 hours. Hunter-Weston's diary records that V Beach is still hung up, suggesting that he thought the problems are temporary, although he was dissuaded from landing to take personal command at that beach. Hunter-Weston appears to have little interest in Y Beach during the night of 25-26 April. For 10 hours LT Colonel Godfrey Matthews had been signaling to Hunter-Weston, demanding reinforcements of men and ammunition there, but received no reply. Hunter-Weston did not reply to Hamilton's first offer to make more trawlers available to land more troops at Y Beach, where they had surprise and lack of opposition. After being ordered to reply to the second message, he only did so at 10:35 a.m. after consulting Admiral Weems. He was still awaiting reports from V Beach at the time. At 6 p.m. Marshall, the commander at X Beach, asked permission to advance to assist Y Beach, but after a delay of 2 hours Hunter-Weston ordered him to stay put and advance the following day. He did not mention Y Beach in his diary, and later concealed the evidence about it from Hamilton until July 1915. On the evening of the 25th of April, Hunter-Weston boarded HMS Queen Elizabeth to confer with Hamilton, who recorded that he was cheery, stout-hearted, quite a good tonic, and, on the whole, his news is good. After the 25th of April landings, Hunter-Weston thought the bravery of the men at W Beach a most marvelous feat. When the force at Y Beach had to be evacuated the following morning, a decision taken at the local level, Hamilton assumed that Hunter-Weston had ordered this without consulting him. Robin Pry writes that Hunter-Weston remained anchored off W Beach. He was out of contact with S and Y, neglected X and seemed determined to avoid any knowledge of V, took no steps to gather information for himself. His one positive move had nothing to do with the situation at V and only succeeded because the Turkish defense was stretched too thinly. Gordon Corrigan claims, without giving further detail, that his command of the division was one of the more competent aspects of the Hells landings, and that his handling of the division, once ashore, was thoroughly competent. First, Krithia, because the French were taking time to get ashore. On the 27th of April, Hunter-Weston postponed his advance until 4 p.m., with a view to taking the hill of Athi Baba the following day. The complex wheeling plan had neglected the effect of gullies and ravines on troop movements. Hunter-Weston, in response to a request for information at 3:30 p.m., reported that there was nothing to justify alarmist reports, but that his troops were exhausted, short of ammunition, had suffered too many casualties and were at risk from Turkish counterattack. He declined Hamilton's request to attack that day. Hunter-Weston wrote to his wife, "My men have effected the impossible. We have managed it. We have achieved the impossible." Quote, Having believed that the landing had only a 1 in 4 chance of success, he now believed that getting ashore had solved half the problem, and that capturing the hill of Athi-Baba would solve 3/4, although he added that this would take some time. There was no time for conferences before the First Battle of Krithia, and the French commander, Damade, was confused as to what was expected of him. Progress up from the bridgehead at Hells was severely hampered by lack of artillery. At first Krithia only 18 guns were available. A comparable division-sized assault on the Western Front at the time might have had 200, and there was a shortage of mules to pull them forward, and nobody was sure where the Turkish front line actually was. The Turks attacked the French on the nights of 1 to 2 May and 3 to 4 May. On the 2nd of May, seeking to exploit the repulse of a Turkish attack the previous night, he launched an attack across the line. Despite his troops being tired and short of ammunition, the 86th Brigade, too tired even to attack, stayed completely stationary. Robin Pryor writes, "No ground was gained by this lamentable episode. Hunter-Weston lent the French, the morale of whose African troops was in difficulties, the Anson Battalion of the Royal Naval Division and some Worcesters." Millwood, a British officer, wrote that Hunter-Weston was cheerful and firm with the French. By this time the 29th Division had suffered 4,500 casualties, leaving 6,000 effectives, although the French attacking on the right flank had suffered in similar proportion. Second Krithia. The Second Battle of Krithia was probably the last chance to break through at Hells. 105 guns were available, of which probably 75 were used, but this was still far fewer than would have been used on the Western Front, and there was still a lack of H.E. shells, mules and knowledge of the Turkish positions, whilst Hunter-Weston's plans were excessively detailed and complex, full of map references and complex wheeling maneuvers. Hunter-Weston had around 25,000 troops, few of them fresh. Intelligence estimated Turkish numbers at around 15,000–20,000, which was broadly accurate. Hunter-Weston planned a three-pronged assault. 125th Brigade, part of the newly arriving 42nd Division, on the left, a composite 88th Brigade in the center, and the French on the right. Hamilton would have preferred an attack just before dawn, but Hunter-Weston, citing the loss of company officers, did not, and it is unclear that he was wrong. Damade agreed, and Hamilton deferred to the Western Front experience, which he lacked. Hunter-Weston persisted in his attacks on 7 and the 8th of May. Hunter-Weston issued a warning order to brigadiers at 23.35 on the 7th of May, but formal orders were not issued on the morning of the 8th of May until 2 hours before the attack was due to begin, giving brigadiers little time to locate and confer with battalion commanders. Colonel Wally Dodd, a staff officer of 29th Division, later called Krithia a mad adventure without the necessary artillery support, and had some difference of opinion with Hunter-Weston about using the 125th Brigade again after their initial defeat. In a letter to his wife, Hunter-Weston noted of 125th Brigade that it was blooded today, it did fairly well, and will do better still as it gets more experience, and that the rattle of musketry lull him to sleep. He also informed his wife that Hamilton thought him a great commander, worth a brigade of troops, which he explained to her was 4,000 men. Hunter-Weston also read to the King's advisor Clive Wigram about how detachment was a necessary quality in a commander. On the 15th of May he commented that 29th Division, whose severe casualties he had just listed, were glorious fellows. Hunter-Weston proposed to break the stalemate by landing 6 new army divisions at Enos on the west coast of Thrace. Hunter-Weston was advising Hamilton that another attack could deliver Athi Baba, with no need to wait for 52nd Division, due on the 7th of June. Aubrey Herbert wrote in his private diary that Hunter-Weston was more hated than most of the generals. As the campaign proceeded and more reinforcements were dispatched to Hells, on the 24th of May he was promoted to Lieutenant General and placed in command of 8th Corps, 3rd Krithia. Hunter-Weston thought the sinking of the battleship HMS Majestic a marvelous sight, and later thought the sinking of a French transport a wonderful sight. After 2nd Krithia, Hunter-Weston still believed that the capture of Athi Baba was a realistic aspiration, as did Gould, who had replaced Damade in command of the French troops on the 15th of May. Hamilton, who would have preferred to wait for more troops and munitions, deferred to their judgment, and planning for 3rd Krithia began at a conference on the 31st of May. Brigadier General William Marshall recorded how Hunter-Weston insisted that the 127th Manchester Brigade sap forward during a full moon on the night of the 2nd of June, despite his protests that they were advancing into a re-entrant. Visiting the troops afterwards to congratulate them, Hunter-Weston commented that it would have been worth doing even for 500 casualties. At the Third Battle of Krithia, Hunter-Weston planned with more caution and realism, gaining better intelligence of Turkish positions, ordering night digging to get the start-off point within 250 yards of the Turkish positions the previous time, and ordering a lull in the bombardment in the hope that the Turkish guns might give away the positions by retaliating, thus enabling counter-battery fire. A breakthrough towards Krithia was almost attained by the British infantry in the centre, where the artillery fire had been concentrated. Hunter-Weston was concerned about an advance in the centre being trapped in a salient and so committed 9 of his 18 reserve battalions not to the centre but to the unsuccessful attacks on the flanks. This error of reinforcing failure rather than success made the battle, in Robert Pryor's view, not one of finer moments. However, Steele and Ampart to some extent defend this decision, taken after consultation with the French, on the grounds that he had very limited reserves and the weaker parts of the line had to be shored up. Afterwards he blamed wire machine gun fire and the French lack of training stopping the Royal Naval Division holding on to captured trenches, and loss of officers. He still thought that more men, guns and ammunition might enable him to win a glorious victory on the 11th of June, and after the event thought it had been glorious in execution. Travers comments on Hunter-Weston's mental and physical detachment at this time, and on the romantic view of war and self-praise in his letters. Hunter-Weston's dugout, dug in June 1915 as protection from Turkish guns firing from near Troy, was called Baronial Hall. Improved artillery concentration. In Pryor's view, there is strong evidence that took to heart the lessons that concentrated high explosive bombardment by heavy howitzers was needed for success, and held meetings with the French General Gould at which they agreed to cooperate with their artillery and adopt this method. Progress was made in some attacks in late June and early July, with one French attack using a density of shelling up to 20 times that of the early attacks. In some cases these inflicted greater casualties on the Turkish defenders than the attackers, as lack of space, reserves and guns did not allow the Turks to adopt the defensive tactics used by the Germans later in the war, holding the front line thinly, counter-attacking and counter-battery fire on Allied artillery. Travers attributes might and told to Hamilton, who proposed it, on Birdwood's suggestion on the 10th of May, having been discovered by the Allies. These might and told tactics were then abandoned and the discovery discovery in Gallipoli largely forgotten by historians. This may be because Hunter-Weston and Gould were both soon invalided out of the peninsula, or because the Allies had never intended Gallipoli to be about trench warfare and still were not interested in learning tactical land warfare lessons from it, or because the development of artillery tactics throughout the war was not a clear-cut process, as is shown by the fact that similar tactics almost worked at Neuve-Chapelle in March 1915 but were then not used for over a year afterwards. Krithia Spur and Gully Spur, which had held up the advance on the 4th of June, were taken on the 21st of June and the 28th of June by limited advances under heavy artillery fire, whilst Hunter-Weston and Gould agreed that an attack on Krithia Spur on the 28th of June had failed because of lack of artillery there. Even in this period, attacks did not always turn out as hoped. During the Battle of Gully Ravine in late June, he attacked with the inexperienced Scottish 52nd Division. The attack succeeded on the left, where artillery fire was concentrated, but the attack was over too wide a distance and half the 156th Brigade, attacking on the right with insufficient artillery support, became casualties, of which over a third were killed. Departure. The next attack was scheduled for the 12th of July, as the superior French artillery would not be available until then. Hunter-Weston aimed to use the relatively fresh 52nd Division as his main offensive force, as the other three divisions of 9th Corps were too worn out for much more than line-holding operations. Hamilton had wanted to deploy 52nd Division to Anzac, but concurred as he accepted that the Turks at Hells needed to be pressed after the losses on the 5th of July. The attack was renewed on 12-13 July, with 155th and 157th Brigade committed for the first time. Marge Gen. Egerton, GOC 52nd Division, later wrote that Hunter-Weston simply enunciated his positively wicked plan, but that there was little discussion. Colonel McNeill of the 4th KOSBs appears to have had a heated discussion with Hunter-Weston over the objectives. He was subsequently killed in the attack on the 13th of July, in an attempt to forestall a Turkish counterattack. Hunter-Weston ordered the Royal Marine Brigade to attack at 16.30. Owing to confusion, only 2 of the 3 battalions attacked, and incurred over 500 casualties advancing over open ground from the original British front line to a line already held by the 157th Brigade. The journalist Ashmead Bartlett wrote of how a great number of the brigadier generals openly refused to take any further orders from Hunter-Weston, who was responsible for the muddle. They all said that he had been affected by the sun a little, and was incapable of giving orders. Hunter-Weston relieved Egerton of command of 52nd Division on the 13th of July, sending him to his ship for a night's rest. Paul O. Williams, a cipher officer, wrote in his diary of how Hamilton, the nominal commander-in-chief of the campaign, had little direct involvement, and how Hunter-Weston and a few staff officers were running the show. Hunter-Weston was himself relieved on the 23rd of July, officially for Enterica Sunstroke, and returned to England. Les Carlian wrote, "What was wrong with has never become clear. The explanations run from sunstroke and exhaustion to enteric fever and dysentery to a collapse and a breakdown. Hamilton saw him staggering off to a hospital ship. Hamilton recorded, 'He is suffering very much from his head.' Next day he recorded, 'Hunter-Weston has to go home,' and a few days later he referred to Hunter-Weston's breakdown. Hamilton later wrote to Aspinall of the Dardanelles Commission that Lady Hunter-Weston had been told that her husband was being sent home, normally a euphemism for sacking. Travers argues that his illness was used as an excuse to relieve him of command. Godley wrote, 'With all his faults, Hunter-Weston was a gallant soul. At the same time, one is rather thankful to think he will not be flooding Freddie Stopford's reinforcements against Athi Baba. Political leaders in London had agreed to commit a further 5 divisions to Gallipoli in July, but had decided instead that further attacks from the Hell's Bridgehead were too slow and costly, and that a fresh landing at Suvla Bay offered a better chance of swift victory. Hunter-Weston wrote to Hamilton urging that he appoint commanders who would push unrelentingly, push without ceasing, push without mercy, without regard to the yelping of subordinate commanders. Seaborne landing on Belgian coast. At a meeting at Dover, Hunter-Weston was asked to lend his experience to discussions with Admiral Bacon, commander of the Dover Patrol, about Operation Hush, a planned amphibious assault on the Belgian coast, after Haig had to abandon his plans for a Flanders offensive in 1916. This landing was eventually scheduled to take place in the late summer or early autumn of 1917, to coincide with the Third Ypres offensive, but in the end never took place.